Hey everyone, welcome back to more malicious compliance stories from Reddit. In this homeowner association tale, picture receiving violation notices for your solar panels on land the HOA has absolutely no authority over. When we brushed them off, they attempted county complaints, and when that fell flat, they slapped a lien on our property as though we were actual members. That's when we decided to launch a hostile takeover. Let's jump straight into it. This XXL story is titled A2, A Find Me for Living Off-Grid. So, I bought their management company. Also, drop a comment letting me know what you think about these new cute cat videos playing in the background. Anyway, my wife and I purchased our property roughly 8 years ago in Southeast Asia. To avoid doxing myself, I'll keep things a little vague. It's a 5-acre parcel sitting on the edge of what was, at the time, mostly undeveloped land in a semi-rural area. When we bought it, our nearest neighbor was a cattle ranch about half a mile down the road. We deliberately chose this spot because we wanted to live off-grid, not in some doomsday prepper sense, but more in a we're exhausted of utility bills and want to be self-sufficient kind of way. I had spent around 15 years in software development and had done well enough to make the switch. My wife is a freelance graphic designer, so she can work from virtually anywhere as long as she has an internet connection, which we get through a satellite provider. Our setup is fairly simple. We have a solid solar panel array with battery storage, a well for water, a rainwater collection system, a composting toilet setup, and a gray water recycling system for the garden. The house itself is a custom-built passive solar design. It's not some rickety shack tucked away in the woods. It's a properly constructed, well-thought-out home that we invested a lot of time and money into, and we also keep chickens, maintain a decent-sized vegetable garden, and have a small greenhouse. Everything is up to code and permitted through the county. We went through all the appropriate channels when we built it, and for the first few years, life was great. Then a developer purchased the land surrounding our property on 3 sides and began constructing a planned community. Rows of identical houses with tiny yards, a community pool, a clubhouse, the whole package. They established an HOA and brought in a management company to handle operations. The development was called something along the lines of Morons United Estates, or whatever these places tend to name themselves. Our property was explicitly excluded from this development. We were there first. Our deed carries no covenants, no restrictions, no HOA membership. And we confirmed this about 50 times with our real estate attorney before, during, and after the development went up. Our property is entirely separate and independent. The development filled up fairly quickly, and for the first year or so after people moved in, we had 0 problems. Some of the new neighbors were genuinely friendly toward us. A few of them would stroll past our place and ask about the solar panels or the garden. We'd chat, share some vegetables, the usual neighborly stuff. Then the HOA held their board elections. The man who got himself voted in as president was, and I say this with the full benefit of hindsight and extensive personal experience, one of the most insufferable human beings I have ever come across. He was a recently retired mid-level insurance adjuster who apparently needed something to fill the power void in his life. He moved into the development about 6 months before the election and immediately began complaining about absolutely everything. Within weeks of taking control of the board, he had assembled a crew of like-minded busybodies and started running the HOA as though it were his personal kingdom. His first targets were the homeowners within the development itself. Grass length started getting measured with rulers. Paint colors were being scrutinized against those little sample chips from the hardware store. Someone got fined for having a garden hose visible from the street. Just the standard HOA tyrant behavior. But then he turned his gaze toward us. And honestly, I think we were his white whale right from the very beginning. Our property, with its solar panels and garden beds and chickens scratching around the yard, must have looked like an HOA president's worst nightmare sitting right at the border of his pristine planned community. The first notice turned up in our mailbox on a Tuesday. It was from a management company, community services as I'll call it, informing us that our solar panel installation was in violation of community aesthetic guidelines and needed to be removed or screened from view within 30 days. A $50 fine was attached. I laughed, my wife laughed, and we tossed it in the trash. The second notice arrived 2 weeks later. This one concerned our chickens. Apparently, livestock was prohibited within community boundaries. Another $50 fine. We threw that one out as well. And by the way, for security and personal anonymity reasons, as Opie mentioned at the start, I changed the currency to US dollars to make it easier to follow. Also, since Opie wanted to remain anonymous, I feel like he sort of doxed himself by using the local currency. Maybe that was just an oversight on his part. Anyway, the third, fourth, and fifth notices arrived over the following month. Our compost bins were apparently a health hazard. Our rainwater collection barrels were deemed an eyesore, and our greenhouse was labeled an unauthorized structure. Each came with escalating fines: $75, $100, $150. I finally decided to respond. I wrote a very courteous letter explaining that our property was not part of the HOA, that we had no covenant obligations, and that we would appreciate it if they stopped sending us violation notices. I included a copy of our property deed showing our parcel numbers and boundaries, highlighted the relevant sections, and mailed it certified to both the HOA board and community services, the community management company. A week later, I received a response, though not a letter. The board president himself showed up at our front gate. I walked out to meet him, and the very first thing out of his mouth was, "So, you're the ones dragging down property values around here, huh?" I explained that our property had existed before his development was even conceived and that we were not part of his HOA. He actually laughed at me and said something to the effect of, "That's what everyone says until they get the bill. The covenants run with the land around here. Your property is surrounded by ours, so it falls under our jurisdiction. You will comply with our community standards one way or another, sooner or later." Famous last words. Little did he know that I would indeed comply with his standards at some point, just in a completely different manner than he ever anticipated. And by the way, please don't forget to watch the full video to the end, because this is truly an XXL story and you really don't want to miss the finale. Either way, if you enjoy these malicious compliance stories, please remember to like the video and leave a comment if you'd like to support me. Anyway, what he said is of course entirely false. That is not how covenants operate. That's not how property law functions. And that's not how any of this works. I told him as much, and he went red in the face and informed me I would be hearing from their attorney. Over the following months, things escalated significantly. The violation notices kept coming at a rate of roughly 2 per week, and the fines kept climbing. They sent us a past due invoice totaling over $4,000. We ignored it. And then we received a letter from an attorney representing the HOA threatening legal action if we didn't pay the accumulated fines and bring our property into so-called compliance with community standards. My wife and I hired our own attorney. She sent a cease and desist letter laying out in very clear terms that our property was not subject to the HOA's authority, that the fines were illegitimate, and that if they continued harassing us, we would pursue legal action for harassment and attempted extortion. That quieted them down for about 2 months, but then they tried something new. One morning, I woke up to discover that someone had contacted the county health department regarding our composting system. Someone had also filed a complaint with the county building inspector about our solar panel installation and our greenhouse. And someone had reported our chickens to animal control. 3 separate complaints, all filed on the same day. What a coincidence. Here's the thing, though. Everything on our property was properly permitted and up to code. The health inspector came out, examined our composting system, and said it was one of the finest setups he had ever encountered. He actually asked me for details about our design because he wanted to recommend it to others in the county. The building inspector confirmed all our permits were current and everything had been built to spec. He shook my hand on the way out and said our solar installation was the cleanest residential setup in the county. Animal control confirmed our chickens were within the county's allowable limit for agricultural zoning, and that the coop was well-maintained and humane. Every single complaint was unfounded, and every inspector essentially complimented our property. But the inspections still cost us time and stress. Each one required us to be home, required us to walk around the property with an inspector for an hour or two, and required us to dig out permits and paperwork. My wife had to reschedule client deadlines, and I spent an entire day just organizing documentation. That was precisely the point. They couldn't defeat us on the merits, so they were trying to wear us down through bureaucratic nonsense. And then they went nuclear. I received a notice that the HOA had placed a lien on our property for the so-called unpaid fines. Let me repeat that. They placed a lien on a property that wasn't even part of the Homeowner Association for fines they had no authority to impose. Our attorney was furious. She filed a motion to have the lien removed, and the judge was not at all amused by the situation. The lien was thrown out, and the HOA was ordered to pay our legal fees for that particular action, which came to approximately $3,000. The judge also warned the HOA's attorney that any further attempts to assert jurisdiction over non-member properties would be considered frivolous. You'd think that would be the end of it, but their board president confronted me at the gas station in town about a week after the lien got tossed. He walked straight up to me at the pump and jabbed his finger at my chest. "This isn't over," he said. "You will comply with our community standards one way or another. I don't care what some judge says. As long as I'm running this community, your little hippie compound is going to follow the rules." "Your rules don't apply to me," I said. "They will. I'll make sure of it. I'll make your life so miserable, you'll either comply or you'll sell." Well, up until that point, I had been playing defense. I had been patient. I had been reasonable. I had let the legal system handle everything. But standing there at that gas pump, watching this red-faced retired insurance adjuster threaten to make my life miserable because I had the audacity to live on my own property in a way he didn't approve of, something shifted in my mind. He wanted compliance. I would give him compliance, just not the kind he was expecting. See, here's the thing about HOA management companies. Most people don't think much about them. They're the companies that handle the day-to-day operations of an HOA. Collecting dues, enforcing rules, managing maintenance contracts, organizing board meetings, that sort of thing. The HOA board sets the policy, and the management company carries it out. In this case, Community Services was the company sending us all those violation notices on behalf of the board. I started doing some digging, and what I found was intriguing. Community Services was a small LLC that managed around a dozen HOAs in the region. It was owned by one individual who had started it about 20 years earlier, and the operation was essentially him, a part-time office manager, and a couple of compliance officers who drove around the various communities looking for violations. It was a modest setup, not some massive corporate entity. Their annual revenue was reasonable but not remarkable, and came mostly from management fees charged to the HOAs they serviced. Their profit margins were thin because the owner hadn't raised his rates in years while operating costs had gradually crept up. In short, it was the kind of small business that works as a lifestyle business for one person, but is hardly a gold mine. What really grabbed my attention was a conversation I had with a friend of mine who works in commercial real estate. I was telling him about the HOA situation over drinks one evening, mostly just venting, and he mentioned that he had heard the owner of this management company, what I've been calling Community Services, was looking to retire. The guy was in his mid-60s, had some health issues, and was apparently looking for a buyer, or at least someone to take over the business. My friend said it as a joke. "You should just buy the company and shut them down yourself." I didn't laugh, though. I went very quiet. My wife looked at me across the table and said, "I know that look. What are you thinking?" "Something stupid," I said. "Something really, really stupid." It wasn't stupid, though. Over the next few weeks, I quietly reached out to the owner of the management company through a business broker. I didn't use my real name initially. I set up a new LLC for the purpose of the acquisition and had the broker approach on behalf of this LLC. The owner was indeed interested in selling. He was worn out, his health wasn't great, and managing HOAs had become more trouble than it was worth. His asking price was honestly quite reasonable for a small business with steady, recurring revenue from management contracts. Here's the part that made this all work. I had the money. 15 years of software development, smart investments, and off-grid living with minimal expenses meant we had a substantial amount saved up. The purchase price of the management company was significant but entirely achievable. I had my attorney review the management contracts the company held with each of its HOA clients, including the contract with our friends at Morons United States. This is where things got truly interesting. The management contract between the management company and the Morons United HOA was incredibly favorable to the management company. My attorney said it was one of the most lopsided contracts she had ever seen in 20 years of business law. It granted the management company broad authority over day-to-day operations, including the power to conduct financial audits of the HOA, approve or reject vendor contracts, and critically, to determine whether violations of community standard were being properly identified and enforced. The management company could also call homeowner meetings, present financial information directly to homeowners, and make operational recommendations that the board would need to formally vote to override. The contract also included a termination clause requiring the HOA to provide 18 months' notice and pay a termination fee equal to 2 years of management fees if they wished to switch to a different company. My attorney read this clause 3 times, then looked at me and said, "This board president basically handed the keys to the kingdom to whoever owns this company." The board president had signed this contract himself about a year into his tenure, apparently without reading it very carefully, because it essentially gave the management company more operational authority than the board itself. My attorney's theory was that the previous owner had probably drafted this contract to protect himself from difficult boards, and the board president had simply signed it without legal review because he was too busy measuring people's grass to bother reading contracts. The sale closed about 3 months after the first conversation with the broker. On a Friday afternoon, I became the sole owner of the management company, the very same company that had been sending me violation notices for the better part of 2 years. I signed the paperwork in my attorney's office, shook hands with the previous owner, and drove home. My wife asked how it went, and I told her we now owned a small HOA management company. She poured us both a drink and said, "This is either the smartest thing you've ever done or the dumbest." I told her it was definitely one of the two. I didn't announce this publicly. Not yet. I spent the first week going through every file, every record, every email in the management company's system. I wanted to fully understand what I was dealing with before making any moves. My wife actually helped me organize everything into a spreadsheet since she's better at that sort of thing than I am. And the first thing I did the following Monday was conduct a thorough financial audit of every HOA the management company handled, starting with Morons United Estates. As the owner of the management company, I had complete access to all financial records, and what I uncovered was eye-opening. The board president and his allies had been treating the HOA treasury like their personal slush fund, not in a blatant embezzlement kind of way, but in a death-by-a-thousand-cuts kind of way. The board president had approved a landscaping consulting fee paid to a company owned by his brother-in-law. One board member had been billing the HOA for community outreach expenses that turned out to be dinners at upscale restaurants. Another had approved the purchase of what was listed as security equipment, but was actually a home theater system installed in the clubhouse, which conveniently was only accessible to board members and their guests during so-called private events. The total amount of questionable spending came in somewhere north of $40,000 over 2 years. I compiled everything into a detailed report with full documentation. The next step involved the compliance officers. The 2 men who worked for the management company driving around searching for violations were genuinely not bad people. They were just doing their jobs. But when I reviewed their violation reports for Morons United, I found something notable. Both of them had flagged multiple times in their internal notes that our property was not part of the HOA and that violation notices should not be sent to us. The board president had overruled them every single time and demanded they keep sending notices. One of the compliance officers had even put it in writing that he believed this constituted harassment and that the company could face legal liability. The previous owner of the management company had apparently ignored this because he didn't want to risk losing the Morons United HOA contract. I called both compliance officers into the office. I told them I was the new owner and that the harassment stops immediately. Both of them were visibly relieved. One actually said, "Thank God. I've been waiting for someone to put a stop to this." Now came the enjoyable part. The Morons United HOA had their quarterly board meeting scheduled for the following Thursday evening. As the management company owner, I would also be present at these meetings to deliver reports and handle administrative matters. Normally, the previous owner or his office manager would attend, but this time I went myself. I walked into that clubhouse and took my usual seat at the side table where the management company representative sits. The board president was already at the front of the room, shuffling papers and looking self-satisfied. There were maybe 30 or 40 homeowners in the audience, which was unusually high for these kinds of meetings. I got the sense that word had spread that the board was planning to escalate things regarding neighboring properties, and people wanted to witness the drama. The board president glanced over at me. Didn't recognize me at first since I had dressed up and was wearing a blazer instead of my usual flannel, and went back to his papers. The meeting opened with the standard HOA agenda items: minutes from the previous meeting, treasury report, old business. Then the board president moved to new business and launched into a tirade about non-compliant properties adjacent to the community that were allegedly dragging down property values. He was clearly talking about me, though without using my name, and he announced that the board was going to ramp up enforcement efforts and was exploring additional legal options. One of the homeowners in the audience raised his hand and asked how much the HOA had already spent on legal efforts against properties that weren't even part of the HOA. The board president became defensive and said the exact figure was not relevant to the discussion. That was my cue. I stood up and introduced myself, not as the off-grid neighbor, but as the new owner of Community Services, the HOA's management company. You should have seen the color drain from the board president's face. He recognized me immediately. "What is this?" he sputtered. "You can't do this. This is a conflict of interest." I told him that there was actually no conflict of interest since I was present in my professional capacity as the owner of the management company his board had contracted to manage this community. I then explained that as part of a routine transition audit, which is standard practice when a management company changes ownership, I had conducted a comprehensive review of the HOA's finances and operations. And I had some concerns. I presented my findings. I had prepared a clean, professional summary of every questionable expense, every self-dealing transaction, every dollar that had been spent on things that provided no benefit to the community. I had receipts, I had invoices, I also had bank statements, and the room went very quiet. I then addressed the violation notices that had been sent to my property and explained that internal company records showed the management company's own compliance officers had repeatedly flagged our property as non-HOA and recommended that no notices be issued, and that the board president had overruled these recommendations every single time. I noted that the HOA had already lost one legal challenge over this matter and had been ordered to pay our legal fees. The board president attempted to shut the meeting down. He claimed the management company didn't have the authority to present financial information to homeowners without board approval. So I pulled out his own management contract and read the relevant section aloud. The section that granted the management company explicit authority to conduct and present financial audits. The very section he had signed himself. If you recall, he told me I would comply with the community standards one way or another. And that is exactly what I delivered here. I made sure even the HOA president would comply with the community standards. That was my malicious compliance. The room erupted. Homeowners were furious, but not at me. At the board. I could see people exchanging those "can you believe this?" expressions with one another. A couple was whispering angrily in the second row. A man with his arms crossed was slowly shaking his head. One woman stood up and said she had been wondering where her dues were going since the pool had been broken for 6 months and no one could give her a straight answer about when it would be repaired. A man in the back row asked why the community landscaping looked so neglected when they were apparently paying a landscape consulting firm thousands of dollars. He pointed out that his front lawn had more brown patches than green ones, and that the common areas looked as though nobody had touched them in months. Another homeowner demanded to know why the clubhouse was being used for private gatherings when it was supposed to be available to all residents. She said she had tried to book it for her daughter's birthday party and was told it was reserved for a board function every single weekend for 3 consecutive months. The board president attempted to defend himself and call me a fraud. He claimed I had purchased the management company specifically to sabotage the HOA and announced he was going to terminate the management company immediately and bring in a new one. I calmly reminded him of the termination clause in the contract, 18 months notice, and a termination fee equal to 2 years of management fees. The HOA could not afford to let me go even if they wanted to. "You signed this contract," I said. "I'm simply honoring it." His face cycled from white to red to a shade of purple I didn't know human skin was capable of producing. One of the other board members, who I believe was genuinely unaware of most of the financial wrongdoing, turned to the president and asked, "Did you actually sign a contract with those terms?" And the board president began yelling that this was a setup, that I was trying to destroy the community, and that none of this was legal. A homeowner in the back called out, "If it's not legal, then sue him." Oh wait, he already tried that over his property and lost. The meeting completely unraveled from there. Multiple homeowners called for a vote of no confidence in the board. Under the HOA's own bylaws, which I had naturally read in full, a majority vote of homeowners present at a general meeting could call for a special election to replace board members. That evening, with over 30 homeowners present, they voted overwhelmingly to remove the board president and 2 of his allies from their positions. The result wasn't even close. It was something like 28-4. The board president stormed out of that meeting shouting that he was going to sue everyone in the room. His wife was waiting in their car outside. You could hear her asking him what had happened, and his response was nothing but incoherent, furious sputtering. Over the following weeks, I worked with the remaining board members and a group of homeowners who volunteered to form a new interim board. We conducted a full financial reconciliation and identified just over $42,000 in questionable expenditures. The new board voted to pursue recovery of those funds from the former board members. The former board president hired an attorney, but once his lawyer actually reviewed the documentation, I'm told he advised settling quickly and quietly, which is precisely what happened. The former president repaid approximately half of the money, and the remaining former board members covered the rest. Shortly after that, the president sold his house and moved away. The former board president's brother-in-law's landscape consulting company was dropped as a vendor. An actual landscaping company was brought in at half the cost, and the community grounds started looking noticeably better within a month. The pool was repaired within 2 weeks of the new board taking over, and it turned out the fix was a fairly straightforward pump replacement that should have been taken care of months earlier. The clubhouse was opened up for all residents to enjoy, and the new board began organizing genuine community events instead of private dinners for board members. I'll tell you something that genuinely surprised me, though. A number of homeowners from Morons United HOA approached me in the weeks following that meeting to express their gratitude, not just for exposing the financial misconduct, but for standing up to the board in the first place. Several of them shared that they had been reluctant to push back because the board president had a reputation for retaliating against anyone who questioned him. As for our property, the new board passed a formal resolution acknowledging that our parcel was not part of the HOA and that no violation notices or fines would be issued to us now or at any point in the future. All outstanding fines against our property were officially voided. Not that they were ever legitimate in the first place. I continued running the management company for about a year after the acquisition, and honestly, it turned out to be a solid little business once I straightened it out. I improved the processes, gave the compliance officers raises since they had been underpaid for what they dealt with, and focused on ensuring the HOAs we managed were actually being well served rather than just being milked for fees. When I was ready to move on, I sold the management company to one of the compliance officers who had been eager to step into a management role. He's running it now and doing an excellent job. And the new HOA board is genuinely great as well. They concentrate on things that actually matter, like maintaining common areas, organizing community events, and keeping the finances transparent. And yeah, let me know in the comments if you were in OP's position. Would you have kept the HOA running, or would you have tried to shut it down entirely? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and also let me know where you're watching from today. Now let's move on to another malicious compliance story. And the next one is titled "The Customer Always Found a Mistake." So we complied. This one goes back to around the 1990s. I was an independent designer for several different printing businesses in the south suburbs of Chicago. Back then, computers were fairly new and print shops were still very old school. Those inserts you used to find in newspapers were still hand-lettered in those days. I would design brochures and flyers, laser print proofs, scan photos. A 150 dpi HP scanner ran about $1,200, which is roughly $5,000 in today's money, and so on. Anyway, one of the print shops had a customer who always found something wrong with the work, would demand a new proof, and refused to authorize the job until he had signed off on a revised proof every single time. This line is crooked. This word is too dark. That sort of thing. So we came up with a solution. I would produce two proofs. One was the original, accurate version, and the other contained an obvious, intentional mistake. He would catch the mistake and request a new proof, and then be told to come back in an hour. It usually took a day or two, but he would return, be shown the second proof, and approve it every time. You want there to always be a mistake? Here you go. And yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time.